On the morning of March 27th, 1995, a man in a dark coat stepped out of the Milan fog. His breath turned to mist in the cold air. He checked his watch. 8:30. Right on time. Across the street, through the glass doors of an elegant building on Via Palestro, he could see his target. A man in his 40s, well-dressed, moving with the casual confidence of someone who had never known true fear. The man in the dark coat reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around cold metal. In exactly 3 minutes, the fashion world would change forever. The name Gucci, whispered in boardrooms and boutiques from New York to Tokyo, would become synonymous not just with luxury, but with betrayal. Because the man about to die was Maurizio Gucci, heir to one of the greatest fashion empires on earth. And the person who ordered his death was the woman who had once promised to love him forever. To understand how a love story transformed into murder, we must travel back to a different Milan, a city of possibility and promise, where a young man named Maurizio Gucci was learning what it meant to carry a legendary name. Born on September 26, 1948, Maurizio entered a world where fashion was royalty and the Gucci name opened every door. His grandfather, Guccio Gucci, had founded the company in Florence back in 1921. What started as a small leather goods shop selling saddles and luggage had grown into a symbol of Italian elegance. By the time Maurizio was born, Gucci wasn't just a brand. It was a dream wrapped in leather and gold. But dreams, Maurizio would learn, come with complicated inheritances. His father, Rodolfo Gucci, was a man of contradictions. Once a charming film actor who graced Italian screens under the name Maurizio d'Ancora, Rodolfo had traded the spotlight for the boardroom. He became one of the most powerful figures in the Gucci empire, managing the company alongside his brother Aldo. Together, they transformed Gucci from a Florentine leather shop into a global phenomenon. Guccio Gucci, the founder, had started with almost nothing. Working in London's Savoy Hotel, he had watched wealthy guests with their luxurious luggage. When he returned to Florence, he opened a small workshop making leather accessories. His work was meticulous, and slowly his reputation grew. By the time Maurizio was born, the company his grandfather had built now spanned continents. Stores opened in London, Paris, New York. Celebrities draped themselves in Gucci. The double G logo became shorthand for status. But success at that scale bred complications. Rodolfo and Aldo had different visions for the company. Their sons inherited these tensions. Aldo had 3 sons who expected to inherit power. Rodolfo had only Maurizio. This created natural conflict. Yet behind the glamour lived a man who demanded perfection from everyone around him, especially his only son. Maurizio grew up in the golden cage of wealth. He attended the best schools, wore the finest clothes, and moved through Milan's elite circles with practiced ease. But Rodolfo's expectations weighed heavily. The old man believed that carrying the Gucci name meant more than privilege. It meant duty. Maurizio was not just his son. He was the future of the empire. Every decision, every friendship, every romance would be scrutinized through that lens. And when Maurizio fell in love, that scrutiny would become suffocating. Her name was Patrizia Reggiani, and from the moment Maurizio saw her at a party in 1970, something shifted in his carefully ordered world. She stood across the room in a red dress, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes that sparkled with mischief and ambition. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty was common in Milan. What drew him was her energy. She radiated confidence, a hunger for life that felt electric. While other women at the party spoke in soft, measured tones, Patrizia laughed loudly, and told stories that made people lean in closer. She was magnetic. And Maurizio, who had spent his life being careful, being proper, being the dutiful heir, found himself wanting to throw caution away. They spoke that night for hours. She told him about her childhood, growing up in Vignola, a small town in northern Italy. Her mother, Silvana, had worked as a waitress before marrying a wealthy trucking company owner named Fernando Reggiani. Technically, Fernando had adopted Patrizia, giving her his name and access to wealth she had never known as a child. But money came late enough that Patrizia remembered what it felt like to want. To look through shop windows at things she couldn't have. That memory carved something sharp inside her. A determination that once she had money, she would never let it go. When she talked about the future, her eyes blazed. She wanted more. More parties, more attention, more of everything. And Maurizio, for the first time in his controlled existence, wanted more too. They began dating in secret at first, because Maurizio knew his father would disapprove. Rodolfo Gucci had very specific ideas about who was worthy of the family name. Patrizia, with her working-class roots and her adopted surname, did not fit his vision. But love, especially young love, doesn't bow to family expectations. The more Rodolfo tried to keep them apart, the closer they became. They would meet at cafes on the edge of the city, walk along the canals hand in hand, and dream about a future where his name and her ambition could build something extraordinary together. Maurizio saw in Patrizia everything his world lacked. Fire, spontaneity, passion. She saw in him everything she had dreamed of as a little girl pressing her face against boutique windows. Security, status, a doorway into a world where money flowed like wine. In 1972, despite Rodolfo's fury, they married. The wedding was small, attended by Patrizia's family and a handful of Maurizio's friends. Rodolfo refused to come. He told his son that he was making a terrible mistake, that Patrizia was a gold digger, that she would bring shame to the Gucci name. Maurizio, young and in love, ignored him. For months, father and son didn't speak. The silence between them hung heavy over Milan, whispered about in society circles and fashion magazines. People wondered if the rift would ever heal. They wondered if Maurizio had truly chosen love over legacy. But time has a way of softening even the hardest hearts. Eventually, Rodolfo relented. Perhaps he saw how happy Maurizio seemed. Perhaps he realized that losing his son entirely was worse than accepting his daughter-in-law. Or perhaps he simply understood that the Gucci empire needed an heir, and Maurizio was all he had. Whatever the reason, Rodolfo extended an olive branch. He welcomed Patrizia into the family, though the welcome was cold and formal. She would be tolerated, if not embraced. It wasn't the fairy tale acceptance Patrizia had hoped for, but it was enough. She was now Patrizia Gucci. She had the name, and that name, she believed, would give her everything. The early years of their marriage glittered with possibility. They lived in a beautiful apartment in the heart of Milan, decorated with art and expensive furniture. The space reflected Patrizia's taste, bold colors mixed with classic elegance. Every room told a story of arrival, of having made it to the top. She had transformed herself from the adopted daughter of a truck driver into one of Milan's most photographed women. Patrizia threw lavish dinner parties where politicians, artists, and business leaders gathered around her table. She had a natural talent for entertaining, for making people feel important. She knew exactly how to seat guests to create interesting conversations, which wine to serve with each course, how to keep the evening flowing from cocktails through dessert. Her parties became legendary in Milan society. An invitation to the Gucci apartment meant you had arrived. She dressed impeccably, always in the latest fashion, often in Gucci from head to toe. She understood that she wasn't just Maurizio's wife, she was a walking advertisement for the brand. When she stepped out, photographers materialized. She knew how to pose, how to angle her face, how to make even a pharmacy trip look like a fashion moment. Magazines featured her as the perfect embodiment of Italian elegance. She cultivated friendships with other wealthy wives, women who understood the pressures of living in the public eye. They met for long lunches, shared confidences, supported each other. She became known for her generosity. When friends faced difficulties, Patrizia was there with advice and connections. She liked being needed. It reinforced her sense of importance. In 1976, when Alessandra was born, Patrizia experienced genuine transformation. Motherhood touched something deep inside her. She held her daughter and felt a love more powerful than ambition. 2 years later, Allegra arrived, and Patrizia's world felt complete. She adored her daughters, dressed them like princesses, made sure they wanted for nothing. Every birthday party was an event. Every holiday was perfect. She wanted to give them the childhood she never had. Yet even as she loved her daughters, Patrizia's relationship with her own identity remained complicated. She had worked so hard to become Lady Gucci. But who was Patrizia beneath that title? She wasn't sure anymore. The lines had blurred. Late at night, alone in her thoughts, she wondered what would happen if that name was taken away. Who would she be then? The question terrified her, though she never spoke it aloud. The family appeared perfect in every photograph. Maurizio, handsome in his tailored suits, standing beside Patrizia in her designer gowns, their daughters laughing between them. To the outside world, they were living proof that fairy tales could come true. Behind the smiles, however, something more complicated was taking shape. Maurizio was being pulled deeper into the family business. His father, aging and increasingly concerned about the future, wanted him prepared to take over. But the Gucci empire was not a simple inheritance. It was a battlefield. Rodolfo and his brother Aldo had always had a complicated relationship, their partnership marked by both collaboration and competition. Now, as both men grew older, new tensions emerged. Aldo's sons, Maurizio's cousins, all wanted their piece of the empire. Family meetings became negotiations. Negotiations became arguments. And Maurizio, who had never been interested in conflict, found himself trapped in the middle. Patrizia watched these battles with keen interest. She had married into the Gucci family expecting glamour and power, but she was beginning to understand that power in a family business meant constant fighting. She urged Maurizio to be more aggressive, to stake his claim, to fight for what was rightfully his. After all, he was Rodolfo's only son. He should be the one running everything, not sharing control with cousins. But Maurizio, by nature, was not a fighter. He preferred compromise, preferred to avoid confrontation. This frustrated Patrizia endlessly. She had not clawed her way into one of Italy's most famous families to watch her husband be passive. Then, in 1983, everything changed. Rodolfo Gucci died. The man who had built half the empire, who had ruled with an iron will, was gone. And in his will, Rodolfo left his 50% stake in the company to Maurizio. Overnight, the dutiful son became one of the most powerful men in Italian fashion. At 35 years old, Maurizio held the keys to an empire. But he also inherited all the problems that came with it. The fights with his cousins intensified. Everyone wanted control. Everyone had a vision for where Gucci should go. And Maurizio, thrust into leadership before he was ready, struggled to navigate the storm. Patrizia, however, did not struggle. She thrived. Finally, she thought, they could claim what was theirs. She pushed Maurizio to assert himself, to make bold decisions, to force his cousins out if necessary. She attended board meetings when she could, offered strategic advice, and made it clear that she expected her husband to rule, not merely manage. Some saw her involvement as supportive, others saw it as controlling. Maurizio's cousins, particularly, grew to resent her. They whispered that she was manipulating him, that she cared more about money than family. But Patrizia didn't care about whispers. She cared about winning. For a few years, it seemed like she might get exactly what she wanted. Maurizio, with Patrizia's encouragement, made a series of aggressive moves. He bought out some of his relatives, consolidated power, and positioned himself as the driving force behind the brand. The Gucci stores continued to thrive. The name remained synonymous with luxury, and Patrizia basked in her role as the queen beside the king. She believed they were building something eternal together, a dynasty where their daughters would one day inherit not just wealth, but a legend. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The business was more complicated than it appeared. Years of family infighting had left the company structure tangled. Debts were hidden in complicated accounting. Maurizio, trying to modernize the brand and expand internationally, made expensive decisions that didn't always pay off. The pressure mounted, and as the pressure grew, Maurizio began to change. He became distant, distracted. He worked late into the night and traveled constantly. When he was home, he seemed somewhere else, his mind always turning over problems he couldn't solve. Patrizia noticed. At first, she tried to pull him back, to remind him that they were partners. But Maurizio, drowning in responsibility, began to pull away. By the mid-1980s, their marriage was fraying. The passion that had once defined them faded into routine. Patrizia still loved the lifestyle, still loved being Lady Gucci, but she began to suspect that Maurizio no longer loved her. He stopped confiding in her about business decisions. He avoided her questions, and when she pushed him, when she demanded to know what was wrong, he would shut down. The man who had once thrown caution aside to marry her was now a stranger living in the same house. Patrizia felt the control she had worked so hard to build slipping through her fingers, and for a woman who had clawed her way from a waitress's daughter to the center of Italian high society, losing control was unthinkable. What Patrizia didn't know yet was that Maurizio wasn't just pulling away from her. He was pulling away from the entire life they had built together. The weight of the Gucci name, the endless family battles, the financial pressures, all of it had become suffocating. He began to wonder what life might look like if he could escape, not just from the business, but from everything. From expectations, from responsibilities, from the marriage that had become more performance than partnership. These thoughts terrified him because they challenged everything he believed about duty and family. But they also whispered to him late at night when he lay awake beside Patrizia. They whispered that maybe, just maybe, freedom was possible. And then he met Paola Franchi. She was an interior designer, elegant and creative, with an easy warmth that felt like sunlight after years in shadow. They met through mutual friends at a dinner party in Milan. The attraction was immediate, but it was more than physical. Paola listened when he spoke. She didn't push him to be more aggressive or more ruthless. She didn't see him as an heir to an empire. She saw him as simply Maurizio, a man who loved art and beauty, who dreamed of a quieter life. In her presence he could breathe, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe he could be happy. The affair began quietly in 1985. Maurizio told himself it was temporary, a moment of weakness, an escape valve for the pressure building inside him. But the more time he spent with Paola, the more he realized he didn't want to go back. He didn't want to return to the cold formality of his marriage or the brutal politics of the Gucci boardroom. He wanted peace. He wanted simplicity. He wanted a life where he could wake up without the weight of a legendary name crushing his chest. And slowly, dangerously, he began to imagine how he might build that life. On May 10th, 1985, Maurizio told Patrizia he was going on a short business trip. He packed a small bag, kissed his daughters goodbye, and walked out the door. He never came back. Days passed, then weeks. Patrizia called his office, his friends, and anyone who might know where he was. At first, people assumed it was just another business trip that had run long. But as the silence stretched on, panic set in. Where was he? Was he hurt? Had something terrible happened? Finally, a lawyer contacted her with a message from Maurizio. He wasn't coming home. He wanted a separation. The marriage was over. Patrizia's world shattered. The man she had loved, the man she had built her entire life around, had vanished like smoke. She couldn't believe it. She refused to believe it. This had to be a mistake, a temporary crisis. He would come back. He had to. But Maurizio didn't come back. He had moved to Switzerland with Paola Franchi, far from Milan, far from the Gucci empire, far from the wreckage of his old life. For the first time in decades, he felt free. He walked through streets where no one recognized him. He had conversations that weren't about business or family politics. He began to imagine a future that belonged only to him. Back in Milan, Patrizia spiraled. Her friends watched as she transformed from the confident, glamorous Lady Gucci into someone haunted by rage and heartbreak. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Her thoughts circled endlessly around the same questions. How could he leave her? After everything she had done, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had built beside him. She had given him her youth, her beauty, her ambition. She had made him stronger, bolder, and now he had discarded her like an old coat, replaced her with someone else. The betrayal burned like acid. But beneath the pain lived something even more dangerous, a cold, calculating fury. At first, Patrizia tried to fight the separation legally. She hired the best lawyers in Milan, determined to make the divorce as painful and expensive as possible. If Maurizio wanted to leave, fine. But he would pay for that choice. She demanded alimony, assets, control of properties. The negotiations dragged on for months, then years. Maurizio, trying to avoid conflict, agreed to generous terms. He gave her millions in settlements. He ensured their daughters were provided for. He tried, in his way, to be fair. But fairness wasn't what Patrizia wanted. She wanted him to suffer the way she was suffering. By the early 1990s, Maurizio's life had taken yet another turn. His relationship with Paola deepened. They lived together quietly in Switzerland, attending art galleries and dinners with friends who knew nothing about Gucci. He began to rebuild his sense of self, separate from the family name. But the Gucci business was unraveling without him. The cousins he had fought with for years were driving the company toward crisis. Financial mismanagement, internal conflicts, and poor decisions had left the brand struggling. In 1993, facing bankruptcy, the family was forced to sell. Maurizio, who had once owned 50% of the empire, watched as control passed to InvestCorp, a Bahrain-based investment company. The name Gucci would survive, but the Gucci family's reign was over. For Maurizio, the sale was both liberation and loss. He was free from the burden that had defined his entire existence, but he had also watched his grandfather's legacy slip away. Still, he tried to move forward. He and Paola talked about the future. They made plans to marry. He began investing in new projects, smaller ventures that excited him without crushing him. For the first time since his father's death, Maurizio seemed genuinely content. He believed he had escaped. He believed the worst was behind him. But in Milan, Patrizia Reggiani had not moved on. While Maurizio built a new life, she remained trapped in the wreckage of the old one. Yes, she had money. The divorce settlement had been generous, but money wasn't enough. She still felt the humiliation of being cast aside. She still burned with rage every time she heard Maurizio's name or saw his picture. Her friends grew concerned. Patrizia had always been intense, but now something seemed broken inside her. She talked obsessively about Maurizio, about how he had destroyed her life, about how he deserved to be punished. At first, people thought it was just the bitterness of a bad divorce. They assumed time would heal her wounds. They were wrong. In the early hours of that March morning in 1995, as Maurizio dressed for another day in Milan, as he drank his espresso and read the paper, as he prepared to walk to his office on Via Palestro, a man waited in the shadows. The man's name was Benedetto Ciraulo. He was a hired killer, paid to end a life for money. Beside him stood Orazio Cicala, the doorman of Maurizio's building, who had unlocked the final door. They had been planning this for weeks, watching Maurizio's routines, learning his patterns. And now, as the morning fog began to lift, they prepared to act. Maurizio stepped through the glass doors of his office building at 8:32 exactly. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who believed his troubles were behind him. He never saw Ciraulo step out of the shadows, never saw the gun rise. The first shot hit him in the back. He stumbled, confused, the pain not yet registering. The second shot hit his shoulder. He fell to his knees, and then, as he tried to crawl toward safety, Ciraulo fired again, and again. The final shot hit him in the temple. Maurizio Gucci, heir to a fashion empire, died on cold marble steps, his blood pooling beneath him. Within hours, the news exploded across Italy and then the world. Maurizio Gucci, grandson of the founder, had been assassinated in broad daylight in the heart of Milan. The fashion community reeled. Politicians called for justice, and investigators immediately began asking the same question everyone was thinking. Who wanted Maurizio Gucci dead? The Milan police formed a special task force. They knew this case would draw international attention, and they felt the pressure immediately. The murder had all the hallmarks of a professional hit. Multiple shots, executed efficiently, the killer disappearing into the morning crowd. This wasn't a crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment. This was calculated, planned, cold. Someone had wanted Maurizio dead badly enough to hire professionals. The list of possibilities seemed endless. Business rivals who resented his success. Family members still angry about how he had consolidated power years earlier. Criminals involved in Italy's dark underworld of money laundering and extortion. The Gucci company had been sold 2 years earlier, and that sale had left many people unhappy. Perhaps someone felt cheated by the deal. Perhaps old debts had come due in blood. Detectives began by mapping Maurizio's last days. They interviewed everyone who had seen him, everyone who had spoken with him. His secretary, his business associates, his friends. They pulled phone records and examined financial transactions. They reviewed security footage from nearby buildings, hoping to catch a glimpse of the killer. The investigation spread across Milan like a web, touching dozens of lives, uncovering secrets that had nothing to do with murder, but everything to do with how the wealthy and powerful lived. One name appeared again and again in their notes: Patrizia Reggiani, the ex-wife. Investigators knew that in any murder, the first suspects are always those closest to the victim: spouses, ex-spouses, business partners, people with motive and means. Patrizia certainly had motive. The divorce had been bitter and public. She had lost not just her husband, but her identity, her status, her place in society. And she had never hidden her rage. Friends reported that she spoke about Maurizio constantly, obsessively, that she had threatened him, said he would pay for what he had done. But threats and actual murder are different things. Investigators needed evidence, not just suspicion. They began watching Patrizia carefully, following her movements, tapping her phones. For months they found nothing concrete. She went about her life, shopping, dining with friends, attending social events. On the surface, she appeared to be simply a wealthy divorcee living off her settlement. But detectives sensed something beneath that surface. A performance. As though she knew she was being watched and was playing a role. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman named Giuseppina Auriemma, known as Pina, who claimed to be a clairvoyant and psychic. Pina had been part of Milan's social scene for years, offering spiritual guidance to wealthy women who believed she could see the future. Patrizia had been one of her clients. The two had grown close, spending hours together, sharing secrets. And Pina knew things. Things that made her nervous. Things that kept her awake at night. Eventually, that nervousness drove her to speak. She contacted investigators through an intermediary, hinting that she had information about the murder. The police brought her in for questioning. In a small room at the police station, with recording equipment running, Pina began to talk. She told them that Patrizia had approached her in 1994, about a year before the murder. She had been desperate, consumed by hatred for Maurizio. She had asked Pina to help her find someone who could make Maurizio disappear, not just hurt him, kill him. At first, Pina claimed, she had refused. She wasn't a criminal, she was a spiritual advisor. But Patrizia kept pushing, kept offering money, kept insisting this was the only way to restore her honor. Eventually, Pina gave in. She connected Patrizia with people who knew people. The criminal underworld of Milan was surprisingly accessible if you knew where to look. Through a series of intermediaries, they found Benedetto Ceraulo, a man with debts and a willingness to do almost anything for cash. The plan came together slowly, carefully. They would need help from the inside, someone who knew Maurizio's schedule and could provide access. That's when they approached Orazio Cicala, the doorman at Maurizio's building. Cicala was an ordinary man living an ordinary life until money tempted him toward darkness. He had worked at the building for years, watching wealthy residents come and go, opening doors, greeting guests. He knew Maurizio's patterns, knew when he arrived each morning, knew which entrance he used. For a share of the payment, Cicala agreed to help. He would make sure the door was unlocked at the right time, that Maurizio would be alone, that the killer could escape quickly. As Pina's testimony unfolded, detectives sat in stunned silence. She was describing a conspiracy that reached from Milan's elite social circles down into its criminal underworld. A network of people, each playing a role, each motivated by money or fear or loyalty. And at the center of it all was Patrizia Reggiani, orchestrating everything like a conductor leading a symphony of death. But investigators noticed something strange. While genuine grief is messy and unpredictable, Patrizia's seemed rehearsed. Her tears came at the right moments. Her quotes to the press were too polished. And when detectives asked her questions, her answers felt carefully constructed, as though she had been preparing for this conversation. They began to investigate her movements, her finances, her relationships, and slowly, a dark picture emerged. Patrizia had spent the past 2 years not just angry, but actively seeking revenge. She had contacted people in Milan's criminal underworld, looking for someone who could make Maurizio disappear. She had paid a clairvoyant named Pina Auriemma to find a hitman, someone desperate enough to kill for money. The investigation into Pina's background revealed a woman who lived in the shadows between legitimate society and crime. She claimed psychic powers, told fortunes, read tarot cards for wealthy clients. But she also had connections to people who operated outside the law. Drug dealers, smugglers, men who would do anything for the right price. Patrizia had chosen her intermediary carefully. Pina could move between worlds without raising suspicion. Detectives obtained warrants to tap Pina's phone. For weeks they listened to her conversations, hoping for a break. What they heard confirmed their worst suspicions. Pina spoke in code, but the meaning was clear. She was coordinating with someone about payments, about timing, about making sure certain people stayed quiet. The conversations referenced the job and the problem that was taken care of. When investigators cross-referenced the dates of these calls with financial records, they found transfers of money that couldn't be explained. Bank records revealed that Patrizia had made several large withdrawals in the months before the murder. She claimed they were for home renovations and personal expenses, but investigators found no evidence of renovations. The money had gone somewhere else. They tracked some of it to Pina, who had deposited unusual amounts into her account. From there, the trail split. Some money went to Benedetto Ciraulo. Some went to Orazio Cicala. Together, the payments totaled approximately $350,000. The evidence mounted. Phone records showed calls between Patrizia and Pina in the weeks before the murder. Bank records revealed suspicious payments. Witnesses came forward describing Patrizia's obsession with Maurizio, her threats, her rage. Friends testified that she had said disturbing things. One recalled Patrizia saying, "I would rather see him dead than with another woman." Another remembered her declaring, "He deserves to suffer the way he made me suffer." At the time, people had dismissed these as the bitter words of a scorned woman. Now they sounded like confessions. And then, the breakthrough. Orazio Cicala, the doorman, cracked under pressure. Detectives had been questioning him repeatedly, noticing inconsistencies in his story. He had claimed to be at home the morning of the murder, but security footage showed him at the building. He had said he knew nothing, but phone records showed calls between him and Pina. Finally, worn down by guilt and fear, he confessed. He told investigators everything: how Patrizia had paid him to help, how he had unlocked doors and provided schedules, how he had watched as Ciraulo fired the shots. He described the planning meetings, the dry runs they had conducted to time everything perfectly. He revealed details only someone involved could know. His testimony was damning, and suddenly the perfect mask Patrizia had worn began to slip. In January 1997, nearly 2 years after Maurizio's death, police arrested Patrizia Reggiani. They also arrested Pina Auriemma, Benedetto Ciraulo, and Orazio Cicala. The trial that followed gripped Italy. Every day, newspapers splashed headlines about the Black Widow, as they now called Patrizia. Photographers crowded outside the courthouse, capturing her arrival in designer clothes and dark sunglasses. Inside, prosecutors laid out a devastating case. They showed phone records documenting calls between Patrizia and Pina in the months before the murder. They presented bank statements revealing suspicious withdrawals totaling approximately $350,000. Witnesses testified to Patrizia's obsession, her threats, her rage. Maurizio Gucci, the doorman, took the stand pale and trembling. He described how Patrizia had approached him, how she had promised him money, how he had unlocked the door that morning knowing what would happen. Benedetto Ciraulo showed little remorse, describing the murder in cold technical terms. Pina Auriemma testified about how Patrizia had manipulated her, pushing her deeper into the conspiracy. The defense argued that Patrizia had been mentally unstable, driven to madness by abandonment. They brought psychiatrists who testified about abandonment syndrome. But the prosecutors countered with evidence of premeditation. The conspiracy had been planned over months. This wasn't madness. This was calculated revenge. The evidence was overwhelming. Patrizia herself showed little remorse. When asked why she had done it, she reportedly said that Maurizio had taken everything from her, her identity, her status, her purpose. If she couldn't have him, she believed, no one should. Her daughters, Alessandra and Allegra, watched from the courtroom, their faces pale with shock. They had lost their father to violence. Now they were watching their mother face justice for that violence. In November 1998, the verdict came. Guilty. Patrizia Reggiani was sentenced to 29 years in prison for orchestrating her ex-husband's murder. As guards led her away, Patrizia turned back one last time. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, cold and defiant. She had gambled everything on revenge, and now she would spend decades behind bars. But even then, some part of her seemed to believe she had been right, that Maurizio had deserved his fate, that love twisted into hate justified murder. She would serve 18 years before being released in October 2016. By then, she was 67 years old. Her famous beauty faded, her name forever associated not with fashion, but with betrayal and blood. The story of Maurizio Gucci and Patrizia Reggiani is more than a tale of murder. It's a cautionary story about the dangerous intersection of love, money, and identity. Maurizio had tried to escape the prison of his own name, the expectations and obligations that came with being a Gucci. He had sought freedom and found it briefly, walking streets where no one knew who he was. He had imagined building a simple life with Paola, free from the weight of dynasty and duty. But you cannot simply step away from a legacy like that. The name followed him. The decisions followed him. And ultimately, the rage of the woman he left behind followed him too. Patrizia had built her entire identity around being Lady Gucci. When that title was stripped away, when she was no longer the glamorous wife at the center of Milan society, something inside her broke. She could not accept being ordinary again, could not imagine a life where she was just Patrizia Reggiani, daughter of a truck driver, divorced and alone. She had clawed her way up from working-class roots, transformed herself through sheer will and strategic marriage, to lose all that felt like being erased. In her mind, Maurizio hadn't just left her. He had destroyed her. And so she decided to destroy him. Today, the Gucci brand thrives under new ownership, now part of the Kering luxury group. The stores still line the most expensive streets in the world. The double G logo still symbolizes wealth and status, Models walk runways wearing creations that honor Gucci's original vision of craftsmanship and elegance. But the family that built the empire is gone from its halls. The brutal fights, the betrayals, the murder, all of it fractured the dynasty beyond repair. The Gucci children and grandchildren live private lives now, far from the spotlight. Some manage their inherited wealth quietly. Others have tried to distance themselves entirely from the name that once meant everything. Maurizio and Patrizia's daughters, Alessandra and Allegra, inherited their father's fortune. They have chosen to live away from public attention, protecting their privacy fiercely. They visit their mother occasionally, though the relationship remains complicated. How do you reconcile love for a parent with the knowledge of what she did? How do you carry the name Gucci when it's become synonymous with tragedy? These are questions without easy answers, burdens they carry silently. The building on Via Palestro where Maurizio died still stands. People walk past it every day on their way to work, to meetings, to coffee. Most don't know what happened there. The blood has long since been washed away. The marble has been scrubbed clean. But if you know the story, you can almost see the ghost of that March morning. The fog, the man in the dark coat, the shots that echoed through the streets and changed everything. What remains is the question that haunted the trial and haunts us still. Could any of this have been prevented? If Maurizio had been honest with Patrizia earlier about his unhappiness, if he had ended their marriage with more courage and less cowardice, would she still have turned to murder? If Patrizia had built an identity separate from her husband's name, if she had found value in herself rather than in status, could she have survived the divorce without destroying him? We can never know. We can only observe how small choices, accumulated over years, can lead to irreversible tragedy. The story reminds us that wealth and fame solve nothing. Behind the designer clothes and the magazine covers, behind the palatial apartments and the society parties, Maurizio and Patrizia were just two people who had once loved each other and then lost their way. They became trapped in roles they couldn't escape. Maurizio, the heir who wanted freedom. Patrizia, the climber who wanted status. Neither could see beyond their own needs and fears, and so they destroyed each other, one by abandonment, the other by violence. In prison, Patrizia once said that she regretted nothing, that she had done what was necessary, but in quieter moments, guards reported seeing her cry. She would sit in her cell and look at old photographs of happier times. Maurizio smiling beside her at their wedding. Their daughters as babies. The life she had once believed would last forever. Whether she felt true remorse or simply mourned what she had lost remains unclear. Some people are so consumed by their own narrative that they never see the harm they cause. They convinced themselves they were justified, that they were the victim, that the world forced their hand. The fashion industry moved on quickly. New scandals emerged, new designers rose to prominence, and the name Gucci survived its darkest chapter. But those who knew Maurizio speak of him with a certain sadness. He was not a perfect man. He made mistakes, hurt people, ran from responsibilities. But he did not deserve to die bleeding on marble steps, ambushed in the morning fog. And Patrizia, for all her crimes, was also a victim in her own way, a victim of her own ambition, her own inability to exist outside the identity she had constructed. She had fought so hard to become Lady Gucci that she forgot who Patrizia Reggiani was without the title. Decades have passed since that March morning. Maurizio has been dead longer than he lived as a free man after leaving Patrizia. A new generation shops in Gucci stores with no knowledge of the family that built them. The murder has become a footnote, a dark moment in fashion history, a story told in documentaries and books. But for those closest to it, the wound remains. Alessandra and Allegra carry their father's absence every day. Paola Franchi, who loved Maurizio and planned to marry him, lived for years with the knowledge that their love cost him his life. And Patrizia, released from prison but forever marked by her crime, walks Milan's streets where people still whisper when she passes. The Black Widow, the woman who had everything and threw it all away for revenge. There's a particular cruelty in how memory works. Maurizio wanted to be remembered as someone who broke free, who chose his own path. Instead, he's remembered as a murder victim. Patrizia wanted to be remembered as royalty, as Lady Gucci, as someone who mattered. Instead, she's remembered as a killer. Neither got the legacy they desired. Their story became a warning instead of an inspiration, a reminder that beneath the surface of glamour often lies desperation, that love can curdle into hate, and that the need for control can drive people to unthinkable acts. Walk through Milan today, and you'll see Gucci stores on every elegant street. The windows display handbags and shoes that cost more than most people earn in months. Tourists pose for photographs in front of the iconic logos. Inside, sales associates greet customers with practiced smiles, wrapping purchases in signature boxes and bags. The machine continues, producing beauty and desire and profit. But if you listen carefully, beneath the hum of commerce, you might hear echoes of the past. Arguments in boardrooms, whispered threats, footsteps in the fog, and a single gunshot that ended a dynasty. The Gucci story is ultimately about names and what we're willing to sacrifice for them. Gucci built a name that meant craftsmanship and quality. His sons expanded that name into a global empire. Maurizio inherited that name and felt crushed by its weight. Patrizia fought to claim that name and lost herself in the process. And in the end, the name survived them all. Because that's what brands do. They outlast the people who create them. They transcend tragedy and scandal. They become symbols that exist independent of the blood and tears that built them. There's something both inspiring and terrifying about that immortality. The Gucci name will survive another 100 years, perhaps longer. Long after everyone who knew Maurizio and Patrizia has died, long after their daughters have passed, tourists will still buy Gucci loafers and Gucci belts. They'll wear them with pride, with no knowledge of the murder or the madness or the family that tore itself apart. The brand will persist, scrubbed clean of history, reduced to a logo and a price tag and a promise of luxury. But for us, here now knowing the story, we cannot look at that logo without seeing the weight it carries. We cannot hear the name Gucci without thinking of how dreams and ambition and desperation collided in Milan on a foggy March morning. We cannot forget that behind every dynasty, every empire, every famous name, there are real people making impossible choices. Some of those choices build beauty. Some build tragedy. And sometimes, most tragically of all, they build both at once. Maurizio Gucci died at 46 years old, killed by the woman he once promised forever to. Patrizia Reggiani is 75 now, living in Milan, occasionally spotted at fashion shows and restaurants. She gives interviews sometimes, telling her version of events, insisting she was driven mad by abandonment. Whether anyone believes her doesn't seem to matter to her anymore. She has become a character in her own story, performing her role until the end. Their daughters remain silent, protecting themselves from the circus their parents created. And the Gucci stores continue to glow on city streets, monuments to beauty built on sorrow, temples to a name that cost more than anyone should ever have to pay. This is the tragic story of Maurizio Gucci, a man who wanted freedom and found death. A love story that became a murder. A dynasty that destroyed itself from within. And a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is believe that you've escaped the past. Because the past, like a name, like a wound, like rage carefully tended and nurtured in darkness, has a way of following you. It waits patiently. It builds quietly. And then one morning, as you step through glass doors into ordinary daylight, believing yourself finally safe, it catches up. And in an instant, everything you built, everything you dreamed, everything you tried to become, ends. Not with glory or redemption, just silence. And the echo of footsteps walking away.